Hi, I'm Ted Wolfe, presented by Guidewise. Welcome to the Implementors podcast, where we connect you to the stories and insights of people who have mastered implementation. Why? Because ideas are easy, but implementation is hard. Join us as we uncover the secrets of successful implementation so you can conquer your implementation struggles. Welcome to the Implementors podcast, where we engage with leading experts to navigate the new frontier of human and AI collaboration. Today, we're joined by a leader who has been helping organizations navigate technology disruption long before the current AI wave took shape. Matt Konwiser, regional CTO and technical leader at IBM. Across more than 2 decades in enterprise technology, Matt has worked at the intersection of data, AI, automation, cybersecurity, and large-scale systems modernization. In his role at IBM, he partners directly with executives and transformation teams to help them make sense of fast-moving innovations, translate complex technical capabilities into business outcomes, and chart a realistic path towards AI adoption that organizations can trust. What stands out about Matt is his grounded, people-first approach to emerging technology. His career spans everything from telecommunications and data centers to advising financial service organizations on risk, governance, and resiliency. That breadth has shaped his belief that AI must be built and deployed with intention, not just for efficiency, but for clarity, safety, and long-term value. He's become a thoughtful voice inside IBM and across the industry on what responsible AI looks like in practice and how enterprises can build confidence as they scale. Today, we'll explore that perspective, how leaders should think about AI readiness, what gets overlooked in the rush towards automation, and what it actually takes to implement AI successfully inside complex organizations. So Matt, welcome to the Implementors podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Matt, that's quite a resume, if I can use that term of experience that you have. I'm going to open it up with a question. And that question would be, what belief have you held about enterprise AI 18 months ago that you've since abandoned?
That's a really good one. So the first thing I'll say is I've been working with enterprise AI for just shy of a decade now. So not generative AI, but AI, because a lot of people use the two terms interchangeably, and they're not the same thing.
Can you explain the differences?
Well, sure, absolutely. I look at it as a series of nested families. If anybody took high school biology, remember kingdom, phylum, genus, species, order, remember all of those things? So AI is the top level of the whole AI category. It's a very broad term. And then under AI, you have things like machine learning, and you have deep learning and neural networks and generative AI and transformer models and all these other things. So the problem is that nowadays, a lot of companies like Anthropic and OpenAI have turned the term AI into Kleenex and Q-tip, right? And it's not. It's tissue and cotton swab, but everybody says Kleenex and Q-tip. Well, you say AI, you really mean generative AI more often than not. And so when I say AI, I don't mean generative AI. I mean the field of AI. When I say generative AI, I mean generative AI. So I know it's a nitpick, but I think one of the problems that we have with all of this fear, because I actually had a conversation with a CIO recently who said that they don't have any AI at all in their environment whatsoever, but they have diagnostics equipment that they're running machine learning algorithms on. And I said, well, then you are using AI. Maybe you're just not using generative AI. And if even at the CIO level, people are interchanging and confusing those terms, then we need to be much more deliberate about how we use them. So to go back to your question, and
right.
I sound like my father at this point trying to lecture somebody. When I go back to the question, I think about it in 2 ways. I think about it AI, and I think about it in generative AI.
Okay.
So in generative AI terms, I think 18 months ago, people were seeing things like ChatGPT, taking over businesses. Like they would just run the roost. And what has happened since then is people have realized that there is no easy button. It's not as simple as $19.99 a month. It doesn't do everything you want it to do. It is capable of making a lot of mistakes. And so people need to pull back a little bit and be more conservative and more meticulous with their approaches to adopting it. But what I also think has changed is that there may have been a belief a year and a half ago that AI would not be pervasive, that it might exist everywhere, but it wouldn't be adopted everywhere for everything. And I think now a lot of people are seeing that, in fact, maybe it will be. And now they're trying to prepare for that and adapt for that in their environments. And for smaller businesses, that means a lot more fear. For larger businesses, it means a lot more complexity. But I think that those are the biggest shifts, both from AI and Gen AI in the past 18 months.
And what do you think 2026 will look like? What will the AI focus and concept be?
So I think it's going to be conservative, ethical, and broad. And those are almost competing terms. Mm-hmm. But what I mean by that is I think that people have been scared from all the studies and all the research that shows that all these projects are failing and that things aren't working and all these evidence of hallucinations, which we can have a whole nother episode on. I don't believe that they actually hallucinate, and I have proofs of that in my opinion. So I think that's the conservative approach, is looking at things differently, being more meticulous about it. The ethical side is, and I was just on a panel a few days ago talking about healthcare and AI, and I said this there and I'll say it here. Ethics is what people do and how they do it when governance isn't looking, right? So we see the federal government repealing a lot of regulations and controls on the use of AI and the deployment of AI and the growth of AI, but we're not seeing AI all of a sudden doing all this crazy stuff when these laws are being rolled back. And the reason why is because people still fundamentally understand the threat and the risk around it, but also the benefit, and they're being very cautious about how they're rolling it out. So we're going to see, I think, a lot more of that, because I think that ultimately people are trying to do good with it. And I think that even in the absence of governance, ethics will prevail. At least I hope. So those are the two biggest things that I think we're going to see in 2026. And then we're going to see scale. We're going to see, when people realize that it can be done ethically and it can be done methodically, that we're going to start to just see this massive expansion of it in a lot of ways, and it will be successful, but it's going to take time.
Okay. So if someone would say to you, in the future, we're going to have a dual workforce, a human workforce and an agentic workforce, how would you comment on that?
Yeah, so I would refer to Mustafa Suleiman's famous TED Talk from April of last year, where he said that we needed to start looking at generative AI as a digital species. And I fully believe that. I embrace that concept, right? Because if you think about this, Ted, you own a business, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So here's my question, if you think about it this way. If you're deploying agentic systems to help in your business, you are not actively looking to replace human beings. So even if you're not, how do you train these systems, these agentic systems? Like, what kind of knowledge do you give them? What kind of information do you give them so they can do a job for your business? You would give them the same type of content that you would give a human being that you're onboarding. Right? Here's the books, here's the reference guides, here's your learning courses or the knowledge courses, here's the news and information, here's everything you need to read and digest, and here's the parameters that you need to look at this information with. So in that context, if I were to ask you, am I giving that to a human or an agentic system, you wouldn't know, because it's exactly the same. But it's not a human being, is it? Right? It's absolutely not. So you train it like a human. You give it knowledge like a human. You interact with it like a human because it's designed to interact with humans, but it's not a human. it's not an IT asset. It's not an IT resource. So if it's not an IT resource because you don't code it and code with it and need coding knowledge to use it, and it's not a human, then it has to be something in between. And that's what Mustafa's point was, is that this looking at things as a digital species is the key. And that's how I would answer that question, is I think that the answer is that it is neither an IT tool nor a human analog. It is something new, and that companies have to figure out how to work with this something new in the context of it being something new. If you try and force fit it into a box of human being but not quite human, or IT tool but not quite IT tool, you will have guardrail problems, which we see. You will have use case failures, which we see. And you will have lots and lots of governance issues and hallucinations. And I'm using air quotes, even though you can't see my hands. So that's what I think is how we need to look at these things. Agentic systems have to be viewed as these digital species.
Okay. What usually guides humans in their behaviors are their values. So when you look at a business, some businesses are very good at defining their core beliefs and values. They make decisions by them. They do their evaluation by them. They do their planning. They build that right into their vision, et cetera, because that's in one aspect of culture, how work gets done. Do you think it's possible to code, prompt values, core values of a business into agentic AI and be able to build an agentic force based on the core values, mission, and vision of your business?
So I'm going to answer that with a question, something that my whole family hates when I do it. If I were to give somebody who was literate, they could read, but had no other knowledge at all, a dictionary, what could they do with it? They could create a lot of sentences. They could use a lot of very advanced words that maybe the person who gave them the dictionary wouldn't even know. But it doesn't mean that there would be any intent behind the construction of the sentences that was used. So the analog I will give you is when you think about how a generative AI system works, specifically large language models, right? So I talked about before the difference between AI and generative AI. Now within generative AI, I'm going to talk about large language models versus other types of models. But when we think about ChatGPT and all of these other things, those are all large language models. So a large language model is designed for one thing, language. It's designed to understand human language and respond to questions in human language. And it does that by being trained on tons and tons of pieces of literature. It gets lots of examples, and then it uses a series of algorithms to figure out what word, what letter comes next when it's assembling something coherent to respond. Values are a human trait. There is an emotion associated with it. If somebody were to ask me what my core values are, I'm not trying to compose a sentence. I'm trying to feel something and then express that feeling using natural language. So a large language model could understand the concept of values because it was trained on enough core material that references it. It could respond to that question in a potentially very meaningful, coherent, emotionally passionate way, but it wouldn't feel any sort of way about it. It would do it as a parrot of what it was given. And so I think that it would be exceptional at reduxing value statements and helping him express those statements in different terms, in different verbiage, in different languages. But if you were to ask it what its core values are, the response it would give you is nothing more than what it was conditioned to respond with for a question like that.
So explain to me then, if I'm onboarding an individual and I want to teach him everything about the business, I would probably want to teach him about here's how we make decisions, how we get work done, etc. And here's the core values of what we have as a business that guide us. Even if that agent would come back as a parrot without the emotional feel of value, do you think there's merit in being able to try to train their large language model, our large language model, along the values of the business? Or is there a different approach that you would take?
No, I think that's exactly how you have to do it. I think it's just important to understand what it's actually doing when you do that, right? It's not being expressive or emotional. It's just appearing that way because it was programmed to.
Mm-hmm.
But if you were to say to it, here are our core values, your responses should always be in compliance with them. It would be able to understand that, and it would probably do a very good job, depending upon the model, of always responding in kind. And so you could absolutely use that as a use case, as long as you understand that the value statements had to be created by a human being, and that the large language model would simply be adhering to them as another guardrail in the system.
Mm-hmm. So comment for me, if you can. A lot of people, when they look at AI, they think of a swarm of AIs, agents out there doing work at one level. But if you orchestrate it into different levels, you have the frontline worker. Then you might have some agents working, I'll say, in more of a inspect and catch trends and differences and things like that at a little higher level. Is that the way people should start looking at different levels, just like an organization has different levels? And is that the way we would model and build a force, if you will, of our agents within the business?
Yeah, I mean, I think that going back to what I was saying earlier, we saw a lot of pilots and a lot of use cases fail.
Mm-hmm.
We saw them fail because either people were trying to go too big, too fast, or they were thinking that something could cure everything when it can't. So the approach you're describing with the layers is a very prudent way to do it. And the example I'll give you is one of the greatest examples of an agentic system is a self-driving car. And it doesn't matter. It is not about a Tesla versus anybody else. This is just the idea of a self-driving car. So if you think about all of the different subsystems that have to exist, you need something that understands all the different rules of the road. You have something that has to understand your location because the rules of the road change based on what state you're in. Well, at least in the United States, they do. You have to have something that looks at all the vehicle control systems, all the vehicle safety systems, all the passenger monitoring systems, all the sensors, and then all the actual control systems of the car, the gas, the brakes, the turn signal, the steering. Well, we don't call it gas anymore, the accelerator, I guess. So you have to have 10, 15, 20 different subsystems. Each of those systems is adept at the one role that it does. Those are the agents, right? So the way you tie them together is with a story. And the story is, take me to my office. So now you've got a system that has to deconstruct that instruction set and then activate all the different agents in all the right chains in order to be able to figure out the route, the climate settings, the time of day, the traffic, the controls of the vehicle, and then the operation into the destination, and then the successful arrival and departure of the vehicle itself. So imagine for a second, you didn't start with something that complicated. You started with something like cruise control, right? Just get cruise control right. You go on the highway, hit the button, the vehicle will stay in the lane at the right speed. Then you add lane change. Car is slowing down, left lane is clear, I'm going under the speed limit, I can make this turn to the left and then turn to the right and pull around. Then you can add basic navigation. I need to get off at this exit in 3 miles, I'm going to get into the right lane and start to slow down and prepare to get into the off-ramp, right? So if companies approach agentic systems like that, so you begin with the end in mind. You want to build a fully autonomous self-driving vehicle. That's great, but don't start there. Start with the most critical core function, which is just get me safely on the highway, staying in the lane. And that's maybe one or two systems, one or two agents. And then once you get that working and it understands the notion, then you can give it more agents to build out the capability until you end up getting you from your driveway to the office with a single story. And that's how businesses have to look at agentic systems. They need to figure out what the main goal is, but don't start there and layer on more complexity as you are successfully at implementing the previous layer of systems.
Okay. When it comes to humans working with agents, what do you see the biggest flaw in the agentic part?
So it's communication. It's the same reason why two humans can't work well together. I see this all the time. So a great example was there was a meme going around about maybe 8 weeks ago where you could ask an AI, was 1995 30 years ago? And the gaffe would be, it would say, no, absolutely not. Oh, wait, yes, it was. And just that was circulating on the internet. Everybody was like saying, oh, this thing is so stupid and you can't trust AI and everything else. I asked the same question to 3 different models and I got the same response. No, it wasn't. Oh, wait, yes, it was. I did something different though. I went to the system and I said, why? Why did you respond that way? And do you know what it told me? It said it was an off-the-cuff guess because it looked at the cultural, music, political shifts from 1995 to current and didn't, in 30-year increments going back into the 1800s, find a significant enough change between 1995 and now to think that it was 30 years. But then when it did the actual math, it realized it was. Now, what's amazing about that is that's a far more intelligent, thoughtful way to respond to that question than most humans would ever think to respond to it. Most humans would look at it as a math problem. They would set it up, they would do the subtraction, and they would answer the question. But because these models are so broadly trained, because there was no context given to how the user wanted the model to respond, it responded in whatever way it thought would be the best possible response to make. When I set up a construct saying, everything I ask you, you will answer analytically, and if it's a math problem, you will solve mathematically, and then I ask the exact same question in the exact same way, it said, well, let me see. Current year, 2025, you asked about 1995. 2025 minus 1995 equals answer 30. Yes, 1995 was 30 years ago. That is a microcosm of the problem we see in businesses dealing with models, humans and AI. Humans don't understand how to talk to these models. Models don't understand the context in which the humans are asking them questions. And both of them is laughing at the other saying, well, that person's so stupid. When the reality of it is, if they just took a little bit more time to understand the model and how to work with it, that we wouldn't have these problems.
How would you begin working and understanding the model better then? Is it all in prompting or is there something else?
No, it's 2 things. It's understanding the nature of a model, and the nature of the model is to do what the user wants it to do. That's the core nature of a model. And so what I say all the time is that generative AI is chaotic neutral. If you're a Dungeons and Dragons fans, you know what that means. If you're not, then you don't. But it's basically somebody or something that just does exactly what they believe they were set on the planet to do.
Okay.
So it's not about right or wrong. It's not about good or bad. It's not about evil. It's just is. So if you understand that that's the nature of these models, then that's the first step in solving things. The second thing is just start a conversation with one. sign up for a free access to one of the big public models, ask it a question, but then the very important thing you have to follow up with is why? Why did you respond that way? Because that will help you learn how that model is engaging with you, how it is interpreting the questions you are asking it. And then you can adjust your style and you can, quote unquote, train it to better interact with you based on your style of questioning. And once you kind of go through that iteration, while also remembering that it is chaotic neutral and it will simply just do what it was designed to do, regardless of whether what you think it's doing is good or bad or indifferent, you'll be an AI genius. I mean, genius in air quotes again, but you'll be far along to being adept at coding, prompting, working with AI.
So how do you go about prompting? And let me give you a little bit more detail before you comment. Years ago, they'd say in IT, do your analysis. It's 80% analysis, 20% coding. Everybody wanted to do the coding. It's 80% coding. I just start coding right away. And then they deal with all the breaks, the bugs, et cetera, et cetera. So with prompting, I talk to some people and they say, oh my God, I put 5 paragraphs in. Then another person said, oh, I got 10 pages of stuff that I printed out and put into it. Other people say, oh, I go way beyond that. How do you start prompting, and how do you look at that as part of developing I'll say the mindset of the agent?
Yeah. So the first thing I do is I set a context. So I don't ever generally prompt. I always create a project environment. And in that project environment, I set very specific parameters that apply to everything I want to do in that project. So the was 1995, 30 years ago thing where I said, I reframed it to say, answer everything analytically. And if it's a math problem, solve it mathematically. That's a good example of how I would frame a project, right? So I set up a project so that it understands within that framework, everything I'm going to ask, I want it to respond in a very specific way, always, every single time. So that's the first thing I do. And then the second thing I do is I don't try and get the whole prompt right the first time. So I've seen examples of prompts that can be 2 and 3 pages long. And they work incredibly well, but I can get them to work just as well with significantly fewer words. And there's a hidden cost to using all those words as well that a lot of people don't understand. But if you can do it with fewer words, that means that you're a more deliberate, accurate communicator. And it means that you've set up a project for the model to be more compatible with your style of communication so that you don't need 2 pages of pre-prompting in order to get it to do what you want, that you can ask for it more naturally and it will be able to do it for you more accurately. So it's a lot of experimentation and it's a lot of iteration, but I never presume to think that the first thing I type in will give me what I want. And I always make sure that everything I do is framed within that construct of a project and that the conditions of the project are well known to both me and the system. And by the way, if you go into uncharted territory on technology or business areas, you can also get the AI to help you generate the right input as the context for the project. So you can say, I want to do a project about this. I want to make sure that you always respond in these ways. Generate a 1-sentence parameter that I can input to a project for this type of generative AI system so that it will always give me what I want. And it will do that.
Okay.
So you can actually use the AI to help you work with AI.
So when you say that the first thing you do is build a context. So you're starting with the end in mind.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're drilling down from there.
That's right.
So when you take a look at a company that is trying to implement AI, and I'm sure you have seen hundreds or thousands of companies in different projects that they're working on, what's your bell curve look like? Where's that sweet spot to say, here's how you start implementing AI, not running the entire automobile, pick out a piece of it, but how do they How do they do it and then build trust with their people? How do they address both the agentic side and the human side?
So sometimes those two things can be in competition, right? Because of ego, because of bias, because of fear,
identity,
or just complexity, right? And identity and everything else. So the most successful ways I've seen it work is the application of a design thinking process, because it helps businesses reconcile in their own head how to sharpen the pencil on exactly what that starting point should be. Because there are certain things that people dream up that they think is just the most amazing way to deploy technology or use AI. And what they realize is that it is pretty wasteful, it's expensive, it's time consuming, it's boiling an ocean. It's just too much. A design thinking process allows businesses to really map out all the different ideas. So nothing gets left on the table. Everything goes up as a potential candidate concept. But then you start to organize things by what makes the most sense, what delivers the most immediate value, what requires the most or fewest number of people to deploy and implement and scale. And when you do all that on a board with sticky notes, it becomes really evident exactly what the right starting point is and how to begin. Because then you can take that one sticky note off as the core idea and then expand on it to create your self-driving car story arc that starts with cruise control.
Okay. And when would you say this is when you should stop? You're going down the rabbit hole. You're just not going to get out of it. You picked the wrong use case. Here's what you need to do. How do you know when you reach that point?
That is probably a question that nobody can answer. Okay. And whoever can should play the lottery on that day because they will win it. I think the problem with generative AI, especially use cases, is it's really hard to tell when they've gone off course. Because, again, I've said this a few times, hallucinations are kind of not really a thing. And I know that they are, but they're not. And what I mean by that is, if I have a broadly trained model that understands lots of different concepts and the English language, and I ask it a question without the right context, the response it gives me might be incredibly logical and defensible to its algorithms, even if it's complete nonsense to the human. So does that mean that that project has failed? Or does that mean that the guardrails or the prompting simply wasn't right in order to get the project to work? I think the only time you can reach a point where you've got a failure point, where you've got a truly identifiable failure point, is if the model has done something that is just so wildly incorrect that the trial and error process based on the output of the model fails. Mm-hmm. Then you know that the project has failed. But one would argue that even in that case, it's not a failure, because if you've learned from that experience, then you can build on it and iterate on it and start from a clean slate, learning from that experience and just keep going. The issue is tolerance. So if a business puts all of its faith and effort into a single project and that project doesn't work out as intended, they can choose to learn from it and keep going, or they can write it off and say, I'm never doing this again, or it's not ready and I've got to wait another 2 years and call me back later. And we're trying to discourage businesses from taking that latter approach, because they need to understand that a lot of these issues are really not necessarily with the underlying technology, but the connection between it and the humans.
Okay. And what, if you could describe an experience that you've had or you know of where people really got that human agent connection working? The adoption took place. They're now using that agent very, very much to do their job. What made that happen? What did you see that said, they did it right? Here's what they did to make it right.
So I think the answer to that is, and there's a couple of different industries where I can give you some really good examples. The answer is, you need to find use cases, especially for large language models, where you need to reduce a massive amount of information into something that is human consumable and usable in the right context. So look at education and higher education, great examples. You have to consume tomes of knowledge, and you have to turn that into something that is functional, right? For both the students and the educators. So generative AI can be hugely helpful for that. Now, if you think about, for example, if I wanted to do a research paper on applied AI and quantum systems, quantum is a very complicated topic, and I am not an expert in either AI nor quantum. I just study it and research it and like to talk about it and have a lot of opinions, which probably means I'm the least informed person ever, because usually those are the people with the loudest voices and the most opinions. But what I do with that is I will use an AI to say, help me aggregate all of this knowledge. This is what I'm trying to get to. Help me locate the things I need to care about, and then tell me why. So when I read them, I'm reading them with the right lens. Right? So if you think about what that does to advance education, it's tremendous, because it helps you find the needle in the needle stack, right? Same thing applies in healthcare. Now, I have an absolute horror story about myself personally this year with AI in healthcare, but we had this very famous example at IBM pre-generative AI, where an AI that was trained in healthcare was able to, and we talk about this as a case study for a while, diagnose a child with Kawasaki's because it asked a nurse, did the child have bloodshot eyes? Now, you think, well, child's barely slept. They've been sick like a dog for weeks. Of course they had bloodshot eyes. So the nurse said yes, and the system said Kawasaki's. And it was something that the doctors and nurses had discounted because they weren't including bloodshot eyes in the differential because they were explaining it away. Whereas an AI system wasn't looking at the human context, it was looking at the differential and saying, well, wait a minute, does this also exist? And if yes, then look for this. And it was absolutely spot on. So education and healthcare are tremendous beneficiaries of generative systems that are done right, because they can also both have horror stories. The other great one is things like legal, because if you want to understand, for example, tax laws or tort law or business law or contracts, it can ingest and digest and redux that information. And as long as you, and this is very important, as long as you ask it to cite its sources and you fact check it, it can be very, very helpful to understand, for example, if you want to operate in 5 different states, what are the tax implications? If this is the type of business you want to run, what are the local laws that might create a problem to operate in a certain way? If I wanted to own a fleet of vehicles for delivery trucks or for mechanic trucks, how would that process work for registration in multiple states? And what's the tax laws in reporting all those different vehicles centrally and distributed? An AI system could help a small business get off the ground with all of those things today with minimal training, tuning effort. So if you look at contracts, paperwork, legal, if you look at healthcare, if you look at education, we're seeing broad use of AI in those 3 areas for a lot of those 3 use cases today.
Okay. I'm going to change the topic just slightly here. AI has been a tremendously fast-growing industry. The agentic AI, it's moving, in days, weeks, months, incredibly fast. So there's a lot of money pouring into it. People are making huge bets on electricity, the data centers, and things like that. Do you think that we're getting ahead of ourselves? We're getting ahead of our skis, and that the market will not be big enough to pay back all the money for the infrastructure that we have to build, particularly if the cost of AI comes down? What are your thoughts?
So I think infrastructure is the biggest concern that most people have right now. I was at a conference in Brooklyn with a lot of Fortune 200s. And when the question was asked by one of the hosts, what is it that you think about the most? Sustainability was a dominant theme, right? Looking at data center consumption, looking at energy consumption, real estate, cooling, you're looking at the environmental impact. These systems are not trivial. And that's one of the things when I talked about 2026, appropriate use, moving away from these ultra massive models into smaller models to reduce the footprint, to reduce the data center requirements, to reduce the GPU requirements, to be able to run things locally. I've written my own agentic system using large language models, and the whole thing runs on a $400 Mac. Completely offline, off the cloud. Everything's running on the Mac, the model and all the Python code. And it works beautifully. And it responds almost as quick as any of the big popular large language models because I wrote it in a way that it uses the system it's got, and I didn't have to buy a system to match what it wants, right? So I think that we are overhanging our skis quite a bit on that. But you mentioned something interesting. So Jevons paradox, are you familiar with it?
No.
So Jevons paradox says that when there is a reduction in overall, for example, energy consumption, that demand will fill the void. So instead of actually ending up with reduced consumption, your consumption will remain steady or grow, not because the original systems still need all of it, but because there'll be so much extra capacity that everybody else will just jump on and fill it. Because people are dumb, right? It's not good enough to just have something efficient. They want to just keep building and building and building. It's like, oh, well, I've got that extra space. I'm just going to keep filling it with stuff. That's also why we have people with closets filled with stuff. And I've got a whole background here full of Legos, right? Because it's just like, hey, I've got room. I'm going to buy another Lego set. So I'm one of those dumb people, by the way. It's not a you all, it's a we all statement. So I think that we need to overall just be more aware of how much these systems really consume. And instead of counting on more efficient models, more efficient GPUs saving the day, we humans need to take a step back and be like, you know what? Maybe I don't really need this amount of AI for all of this, or this model, or this amount of resources. Maybe I can do it more frugally, and I should. And if we can do all that, then Jevons paradox won't be realized. So that's the short answer to how I think we need to see that, because we are overhanging our skis, and the answer is not just going to be a more efficient model or a more efficient GPU. It's got to be the humans pulling back the consumption and realizing that we don't need to just fill the capacity just because it's there.
Yeah.
That we all need to be more frugal with it.
So what were your thoughts, I'll say a year or 2 years ago, when China introduced their alternative to ChatGPT? What did you think when that came out and you started digging in and you started learning the facts behind all of that? What were your impressions and observations?
So the original announcement had made some pretty fantastical claims about the total training costs and the number of GPUs it needed, and it was later debunked, but with the asterisk there that even the more accurate predictions of the energy and the GPUs required to get it up and running were still a small fraction of what it took the large providers to get theirs to work, right? So yes, it still did great things, even if it didn't do them quite as great as the claims were. What it did, though, was it changed the direction of the asteroid that is ChatGPT and Claude and others hurtling towards us, because it proved that you could build something at that capability set, but do it in open source. So it wasn't so much about the size of the model, it was the fact that it was free. Right? That's really what the game changer was, because I think going back to my Kleenex and Q-tip comments earlier, it had become so commercialized and synonymous that you didn't even say, oh, I need to sit down with the largest language model. You said, oh, I'm going to just ask ChatGPT. Even if you weren't talking to ChatGPT, everybody called it ChatGPT, right? What DeepSeek did was it kind of proved the notion that you could take an open source model, you could run it on a local scaled down system and get equivalence without having to be beholden to a large company at $20 to $200 a month per person in order to get those capabilities. Then it just became a matter of where do you use it and where do you host it and what do you use it for? So I think DeepSeek fundamentally changed the market because it proved that public capability existed for pretty much anybody. I mean, I think even Sam Altman said after that they went down the wrong path. And then within a few months, they released an open source version of ChatGPT.
So where do you see 2027 being between China, all the work they're doing with AI, what the states, what we in America are doing? Where do you see this all moving, and what kind of market do you see 2 years down the road, if you can see that far into the future?
So there's a lot of things going on right now, right? We've got this race for AGI. We've got the concerns about ASI. We've got massive developments around quantum systems. We've got chip manufacturers becoming more efficient. We've got people looking at small nuclear reactors to power data centers.
Right.
There's so much going on. I don't really know where it's going to go in 2027 and beyond. If I were to have some predictions, what I hope is that we will see a lot more open source. We will see a lot more agentic systems running on smaller models in more efficient ways. And I'm hoping that people will really jump on this open source bandwagon. I hate to use that word, but the open source train, I guess is a better way to say it, and start to just develop content for the good of all, and just release it, just distribute it. It's I had actually talked about this morning. The movie Elysium. Are you familiar with it? I think it was Matt Damon. I can't remember.
I'm not sure.
But it's a space station.
Oh.
Basically, all the upper crust, all the ultra wealthy live on this space station above Earth that has just become a dystopian nightmare. And they have these special machines that you can sit in, and it will just scan you and cure you of everything. It'll fabricate stem cells and cure you of any genetic disorders. If you have a broken bone, it'll mend it. If you have a sprained wrist, it'll fix your ligaments. Like, it'll just do everything for you. And you've got all these people that still live on Earth as the lower classes that have no access to these systems, even though it wouldn't cost anything to bring these systems down. It's a caste system, and they just don't get them. And the whole movie is about convincing the AI systems that run the space station that the citizens are on the planet as well. And as soon as it realized that, it said, holy crap, there's a ton of people down here that need all of this medical support. And it dispatched automated ships, robots, and these healing machines, and just started bringing people in by the hundreds and curing everybody. And there was really nothing stopping it from doing that from the beginning of the movie, other than human beings deciding in a capitalistic way that technology should only be reserved for the people that lived on the space station. So when I look at 2027, 2028, 2029, I want to see a point where we don't make the mistakes that were set in the beginning of Elysium, and we just go straight to the end. Where we say, we have the ability to build this technology for all. We can monetize it in such a way that we can remain profitable, but we should, for the good of humanity, be figuring out how to distribute this to people so that they can take advantage of it and bring everybody up instead of create greater separation. And that's That's my hope of the next 3 to 5 years, is when we come out with these next major breakthroughs, that's how we see people using them.
Okay. It's in line with the next question that I wanted to ask. I think it was in the news feeds today on the internet. There was one of the original individuals, and I can't remember his name, who was interviewed and asked about the future of AI. And he said, we have the opportunity, quote unquote, I believe, that we could destroy the world and ourselves, or we could make it really good. And he's scared because he's saying, I think it's going to go in the other direction. What do you think?
I think that there's a lot of people that have a lot of negative views on the future, a lot of concerns. I actually started reading a book this morning that was basically, I forget the exact title, but it was essentially, if we build superintelligence, we'll all die. I think that was the title of the book. I think that those people have some potentially valid claims. But the key point is, at least in the introduction of the book, because I only got about 20 pages in this morning, the gist of it was, if we build superintelligence based on today's AI, based on today's capabilities with today's people, it could end in apocalyptic disaster for all. And I don't necessarily disagree with that, but it doesn't mean that artificial and superintelligence will kill us all. It means that we will kill us all, because we're the ones building these systems and we gave it the current context of knowledge. So if it decides to pull an Ultron on us or a Thanos or whatever else, it's our fault. It's not the ASI, it's us. There's another group that is completely dismissive of it. I'm right in the middle. I'm sitting right on the 50-50 scale of this apocalyptic index. And there is actually an index that's rated on a percentage from 0 to 100 as to how do you think the world is going to end, or do you think everything's going to be fine? Well, 100% means the world is absolutely going to end, and 0 is the other way around. I'm right at the 50% line, because I think that it could really go either way. I think that we're developing technology that could be used for the good of all. I think that we have some humans that believe there is the right way to use it, but I think it could also go very horribly wrong.
Okay.
And I think we just don't know where it's going to go yet.
And what's going to be the catalyst that triggers it in one way or the other, do you think? Any thoughts?
It could be who gets there first, and not a world power conversation, but an individual motivation perspective, right? There was a great paper that was written a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago now, that proved quite equivocally, using models from around the world, that the models will always reflect the ideologies of their creators. So I think that depending upon who the creator is and which model achieves that level of capability will dictate which way we head.
Could I interject the word values there or not?
You could. I mean, ideologies, values, right? It's similar human concepts. So absolutely. It's a great way to tie it back to an earlier question.
When you look, little change here, when you look at AI, what metrics should we be tracking in businesses that we're not, so that we can better read what they're doing? I mean, we have financial statements. That's what everything's usually about. The finances and the people, the operations and the people. Now we're introducing AI. What metrics do we need to read it, understand it?
Yeah, so that's highly subjective. I think that from an overall governance perspective, you want the basics, which is who is accessing it, how often, what's the nature of the questions being asked, and what's the nature of the responses. The other key metric is what is going into it. So if you're training a model from scratch, what are you using to train it? If you're using a pre-trained model, can you understand, can you see all of the training data that went into it? And if so, are you in 100% alignment with all of the training data being used? And then the next piece of it is, how are you protecting it? From a guardrails perspective, how are you coaching it and directing it to make sure that it doesn't go off the rails, that it doesn't drift, and that it doesn't answer things outside of scope of what you needed or wanted to, regardless of what it may know? Those are all the basic metrics. So it's, transparency, accountability, explainability, security, privacy, right? All of those are all the key metrics from an enterprise business perspective. But I think the other important thing you have to look at is, and you touched on this a little bit, is also cost to business and cost to operate. Because I had mentioned earlier that those multiple page long prompts have a hidden cost that people aren't considering, right? Every word you're giving a large language model, it has to process. So if you're outsourcing those models to another big provider, you are paying for every one of those words. So if you need to feed it 1,000 words to get it to produce a prompt, you're already 1,000 words in the hole.
Yeah.
If you're not outsourcing it and you're using it internally, there's still an energy cost to each one of those words. And we can substitute the word for the word token, by the way, and that's what I'm talking about, but I'm using more human language. So that's another key metric that we need to look at from a success failure perspective, because you don't want to just give it an all-you-can-eat credit card with no limit and say, oh my God, this thing's amazing, it's completely transformed my business, and then at the end of the month have a $4 million credit card bill, right? So you have to look at the business impact and all the different technological elements of the guardrails and the governance of it when you're looking at those metrics.
Okay, so let's go back to the very beginning of our conversation. You had talked about the differentiation between AI and agentic AI, or GPT general. Every conversation I have, it seems like everybody wants to talk about the Chat GPT type of AI. What are we missing by not talking about the entire field of AI?
So I think what we're missing, and when I say we, I mean general population, because a lot of the scientists aren't. There's a lot of other models out there that are very, very advanced, that are far more capable than a large language model at doing different things, like understanding the physical world, the natural world. Things like world models, which are so named because they have the ability to understand that. One of the biggest misconceptions that I think people have is when we think of AGI or ASI, we assume it's just going to be a incredibly adept large language model. I think it won't be. I think it'll be a combination of world models with a large language model on the front end so that those world models can communicate with humans. But the actual intelligence isn't coming from the large language model. The large language model is just assembling sentences. The world models that are being developed right now that can understand the natural world and the nature of elements and forces and reactions and everything else, those are the things that I think people really need to understand better, because anything that involves a physicality, those world models are essential. So if you're trying to determine force, inertia, momentum, anything that moves, things like assembly lines, and analyzing sports, working and operating robotics, right? Those all require world models to be successful. Large language models are just the fancy front end to this realm of technology that we're only starting to play with a little bit. And I think that's what people just need to really realize more than anything else, is that there's a lot more to it.
So there's a lot more AI to come that we're just not even thinking of yet. When you look at your career, you look back on it, let's say your midpoint, what do you see in the future? I'm sure you look in the past. I know I'm an ex-IBMer and I'm thinking of the old System 38s and 34s going back decades. I look at what we're doing today, I'm amazed. When you put yourself in that position, what do you think? What would an amazing thing be that you think might happen in the future with this technology?
So aspirationally, democratization.
Okay.
I mean, and this has not been an IBM commercial really at all, right? This has been a lot of just personal reflection and commentary, but I will now add a little bit of an IBM commercial to it and say one of the reasons why I really enjoy working here right now is because our priority is not to commercialize and sell models. we're taking all of our technology, all of our model capabilities and releasing it for free. And we have for a year now. You can go to Hugging Face, you can type in IBM Granite, and you can download our large language models, our document models, our text-to-speech models, our vision, our computer vision models. And anybody can download them and use them at no charge, with no obligation or connection to IBM whatsoever. And I think that that's really important because it puts that technology in the hands of people who don't need anything more than a laptop to start playing on their own without being beholden to anybody or anything for this capability, right? It puts the power in their hands. And I think that's a really important strategy point from IBM. Now, we have ways to monetize the AI craze and the AI trends in a lot of different other ways, which we definitely do. But that's an important value point, is democratization of the models itself and the knowledge that exists around them. So what I want to see for me, and I want to see for our future, is a point where the technology becomes so beneficial that people see beyond the need to capitalize on it from a monetary and a profit perspective and figure out their own ways to be profitable and prosperous and successful, but make sure that the knowledge and the technology is available to everybody as it comes out. I think that's a future I would very much like to be a part of.
Good.
And I would like to do anything I can to be a part of it.
Good. And I think you'll end up being there and doing that. Thank you. What do you think, what's the future for Matt Konwiser look like?
I have no idea. I mean, I've done a lot of different things. I've done home construction. I've been an architect. I've done physical infrastructure, cellular network design, network infrastructure, cybersecurity. I've done a lot of things. And I've always just kind of gone with what's felt right and what's gone with the trend. And so right now I have my eye on quantum. I have my eye on advanced AI ethics and governance. I have my eye on advanced technology and futurism. So if I could figure out how to turn all that into a next career step, then I would probably do it. But I don't have a good answer for it yet. I just have ideas. So that's the best answer I can give you for right now.
Okay. Well, it sounds like you're in a good position right now where you can evaluate and look at that. And I know you're an invaluable asset to IBM, and a lot of the people you're working with think very highly of you. So, Matt, thank you very much for your time. If somebody wants to talk to you, what's the best way to contact you?
So absolute easiest way is just hit me up on LinkedIn. I write almost daily. I'm there all the time. I do respond to direct messages as long as it's not a solicitation. Mm-hmm. The only thing I would say is if you do want to connect with me and you want me to connect back, then just send me a note saying, hey, you heard me on the podcast. And that way I'll know it's not just a generic, click to connect kind of a thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, LinkedIn's a great way to engage. And, if we have a good dialogue there, I'm happy to exchange contact information and have, future discussions.
Okay. Very good. Matt, thank you very much for your time. It's been very informative, and I've enjoyed the conversation very much, and I learned a lot from you. Thank you very much.